Alright, welcome back to our Cryengine tutorial video set. In this tutorial, I'm going to talk about textures and materials. You can see here that I've generated a little island for us to work with, and the default texture and material on this island is just this blank white, and it kind of makes it look like an iceberg. And that's kind of boring. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to try and change this to make it look like a grouping of rocks in the ocean. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go up to my terrain menu here, and I'm going to open up the texture window. When this window opens, you'll see that it is organized by layers, and right here we have this default layer. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and add another layer. And when I add this layer, you'll see it automatically names it new layer for me. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to rename it to be rock. All right, so there's two parts to every layer to making it look realistic. One is the texture, and the second is the material. So I'm going to start with the texture here. In order to change the texture on this layer, I'm going to go over here on the left, and I'm going to go to this Change Layer Texture menu. You'll notice it over here, it opens up this standard looking file system. Over here on the left of this window, we have our popular folders, and I find that the best textures are found under Terrain, and then over here if we go to Detail. And under Detail you see we have a lot of options. So a good texture for making this look kind of rocky, I've found, is this silt texture over here. So I'm going to go ahead and select this silt texture, then I'll click Open, and you'll notice that on our layer it is now assigned this silt texture to our layer. So the next part is the material. Now, if you already have a layer created like we do on our default layer, you can access the material very easily under this Materials column, and you can click on the material and it would open up the material editor for you. But since we have a new layer and we don't have one to select, we're going to have to open up our material editor manually. So I'll go up here to View, and under View I will open my view pane, and I will open the material editor right here. And it brings up this window. And now we have a new file browsing system, and it will populate the list of material folders that you have over here on the left. And in the file tree, I'm going to go to Materials, and then I'm going to go to Terrain. And under here, you will see that we have a lot of materials to work with. Now, in this file, there is a match to almost every texture that we saw in that detail folder in the texture browser. So we want to find one that matches what we selected in our texture menu as best as possible. And you can kind of mix and match them. You can create some interesting effects with it. I'm going to go ahead, though, and select this Terrain Silt Sand one. When I click on this, you'll notice that I have all these options over here for the material, and they're kind of hard to mess with because it's pretty easy to break them. But so once I have one selected, I'm going to go back over here in my texture layers window, and I'm going to click Assign Material. And it will assign this material to my current layer that I had selected. Okay, so I can now close my material editor. And back in our layers menu, you can see that our selected layer now has an assigned texture and it has an assigned material. So we're ready to move on. I'm going to go ahead and close this window. So the next step is going to be on our roll-up bar over here on the right. If I go to the Terrain tab, one of my options is Layer Painter. And what this is going to do is allow us to paint the layers of textures that we've created in that texture editor. So you can see down here at the bottom, it lists our different layers that we've created. I have my default, and I have the rock one that I've created. So the settings here are pretty self-explanatory. The radius is the size of your brush. The hardness is the opacity at which the brush will paint. And then down under here on layer, we have the brightness and we have the color. So you can choose a color for your layer, and you can choose the brightness at which that color will show up. Now the color isn't going to change the way that the layer looks, it's just going to tint it a little bit. You can also choose the altitudes and the slopes at which the layer will paint. So if you were making, say, a snow-capped mountain, and you wanted the snow to only paint at a certain altitude because that's where the snow would fall naturally, you could set your altitude to be higher and get it so just the caps of the mountain are painted. So since this is a rock texture, I'm going to go ahead and change my color to be something darker. I'll try and find a brown here. And I'll put my brightness up a little bit so that we can see how that affects it. And then over here, you'll notice that I have a brush ready to paint. So I'll go ahead and paint a little bit of area. And you can see here that this is painting for me some nice rocky texture. So I'm going to go ahead and change the radius of my brush to be really big and encompass the entire island. And paint the entire island. There you go. Now we have a grouping of rocks sticking up out of the ocean. It's important to note that these textures you can paint are directly related to the menu that came up when we were creating our map for the first time. The Generate Surface Texture menu, where we chose the detail of our texture. So if we want to change that option, we can simply go up to File, go to Generate Surface Texture, and it's going to allow us to change those parameters. So if I want my texture to be a little bit smaller, I can do that, or if I want it to be high quality, I can do that, and I'll click OK, and it will regenerate that for me and change it to the parameters that you've selected in there. It doesn't look like much has changed here, but sometimes it can be really helpful. That's about all I wanted to talk about for textures today, so with that, I'll close.